My husband made me sign a prenup because he thought I was broke. He said love didn't pay bills. He did. What he didn't know was that I was hiding a $15 billion inheritance. And the contract he used to control me? It unlocked everything. Caleb smiled as I held the pen, like someone who believed he'd just locked my life into place. His lawyer had highlighted the no future claims section in bright yellow, and the entire room, Caleb's attorney, the notary, even the assistant who'd brought coffee, fell silent, waiting for me to crumble. I could have argued. I could have ripped the pages in half and walked out of his high-rise Atlanta condo without looking back. Instead, I signed. Because sometimes, the best way to win is to let someone believe they already have. What Caleb didn't know was that 3 trustees in New York and Zurich were watching this exact moment, waiting for one specific condition to be satisfied before releasing a $15 billion multi-generational fortune. That condition? That I enter marriage without my spouse demonstrating financial coercion or exploitation. The prenup Caleb drafted, with its aggressive terms, its dismissive language, its assumption that I brought nothing to the table, would become the final proof the trustees needed. When that inheritance surfaced, the prenup wouldn't protect him. It would expose him. Before we continue with Arielle's story, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Drop a comment. Are you watching from Oakland, Atlanta, New York, or maybe Zurich? I'd love to know where you're tuning in from around the world. Now, let's see how Arielle's quiet patience is about to change everything. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Caleb's Buckhead condo framed the Atlanta skyline like a trophy. The late evening city lights cast a cold glow over the glass dining table where Caleb had spread the prenuptial agreement. I sat across from him in the chair I'd occupied exactly 3 times since moving in with my 2 suitcases and a nonprofit salary that barely covered my student loan payments. Everything in this space screamed his. The furniture, the art, the address, the power. The prenup was thick, professional, and highlighted in places that made my chest tighten, though I kept my face neutral. Caleb had been planning this moment for weeks. It's really for both our protection, Caleb said, his voice carrying the same tone he used with contractors who couldn't afford his premium developments. My assets, my projects, my equity, everything I've built needs to be secure. He tapped the signature line with his Mont-Blanc pen. And honestly, Arielle, with your situation, this just makes sense for everyone involved. The word situation hung in the air like an indictment, referring to my work at a community development nonprofit as if it were a character flaw rather than a calling. I read through the clauses slowly, my expression calm despite the anger building beneath my ribs. It protected his real estate portfolio, his future developments, his investment accounts, even his anticipated earnings from projects that didn't exist yet. Provisions for spousal support were insultingly minimal. $2,000 a month for no more than 2 years, adjusted for inflation at Caleb's discretion. Every clause was a calculated humiliation, wrapped in legal language that made contempt sound like prudence. This section here, I said quietly, pointing to a clause near the end. I'd like to add an addendum about mutual respect and open financial communication in the marriage. Caleb's laugh was soft but dismissive. Arielle, this is a legal document, not a vision board. We don't need flowery language about feelings and respect. That's what wedding vows are for. He leaned forward, his expression shifting to patient understanding. Look, I know this might sting a little, but we both know I'm the one taking the real risk here. I have properties, developments, a reputation in this city. Investors who trust me with tens of millions. You have. He paused. You have your principles. That's admirable, but it doesn't change the math. The condescension in his voice was wrapped in concern, making it worse than open cruelty. The math, I repeated softly, picking up the pen. I signed my name with steady strokes across every highlighted line. Then I set the pen down and looked directly into his eyes. I'll sign this, Caleb, but I want that addendum about mutual respect added to the final version. Call it my one non-negotiable. There was something in my tone that made him pause, a quiet authority he wasn't used to hearing from me. Respect. Caleb's eyebrows rose. Arielle, what exactly do you think you're bringing to this negotiation? The question came out before he could stop it, revealing more about his mindset than any contract clause could. In his mind, I had nothing to bargain with. He was doing me a favor by marrying me at all. I held his gaze, then smiled, small, knowing, patient. I'm bringing myself, Caleb. That should be enough. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe the faintest hint of unease. But it passed quickly, replaced by the satisfied smile of a man who believed he'd just secured his future. He had no idea he'd just documented his own character in legally binding terms. He had no idea that in a Manhattan law office, trustees were already reviewing scanned copies of this prenup, checking off boxes that would activate the largest private wealth transfer of the year. He had no idea that the woman sitting across from him, quiet, unassuming, dressed in a Target blouse, was about to inherit more money than his entire development portfolio would be worth in 3 lifetimes. But he would. Soon. What Caleb didn't know was that the signature he celebrated would unlock everything. 5 years earlier, Oakland, California. I grew up learning that wealth had a volume control, and my family had turned theirs all the way down. Not out of humility, out of survival. The Monroe family fortune, $15 billion built over 4 generations through logistics, infrastructure, and strategic acquisitions, had survived wars, recessions, and market crashes. But it almost didn't survive us. My grandfather's death when I was 16 triggered a vicious battle for control that played out in boardrooms, courtrooms, and eventually, violently. I watched it all from my mother's townhouse in Oakland's Rockridge neighborhood, where we'd relocated after my father's death 3 years earlier. The official cause was a heart attack. The family whispered about stress, betrayal, and threats that were never investigated. By the time I turned 18, 3 of my uncles were estranged, 2 cousins were in federal litigation over embezzlement accusations, and the family name had become a cautionary tale about what happens when money matters more than blood. I was the last direct heir standing. My mother made a choice. She would raise me away from all of it. No country clubs, no society pages, no trust fund teenagers comparing summer homes. Power, she told me on my 18th birthday, should never announce itself. The moment you need people to know you're powerful, you've already lost. I took that lesson seriously. I attended UC Berkeley on academic scholarships I didn't need, worked campus jobs I didn't have to, and lived in shared apartments with roommates who had no idea my family's foundation owned the building. I dressed from thrift stores and Target. I brown-bagged lunch. I took public transit, not because I had to, because I needed to learn who I was without the money defining me first. And because the trustees, cold, practical men in New York and Zurich who managed empires, not emotions, had made a decision after my mother's death when I was 23. The fortune would be protected by making it invisible. Trusts within trusts. Foundations layered like nesting dolls. Corporate proxies that obscured ownership through 12 degrees of legal separation. The Monroe fortune existed in holding companies with names like Clearwater Infrastructure Holdings and Pacific Logistics Group, entities that sounded bureaucratic and forgettable, exactly as intended. And there was one final protection, a single condition for my inheritance. I had to prove I could build a life without exploitation, without coercion, without someone marrying me for access to money they didn't know existed. The trustees would monitor at major life inflection points: graduation, career choices, relationships, and marriage. If I married someone who demonstrated financial coercion before the inheritance activated, the condition would fail. The money would remain locked for another generation. But if I married someone who chose me, really chose me, without knowing what I was worth, then the inheritance would unlock. Simple, brutal, and designed to answer one question the trustees had seen destroy too many families. Did someone love you, or did they love your access? I'd dated carefully. A few relationships that ended amicably. One serious boyfriend in grad school who'd proposed, but I'd said no, not because of the money, but because I knew he was in love with the idea of me, not the reality. Then I met Caleb Monroe at a nonprofit fundraiser in Atlanta. The coincidence of the last name made us both laugh. He was charming, ambitious, confident in ways that felt refreshing. He talked about building things, actual buildings, developments that would reshape neighborhoods. He had vision, energy, hustle, and he had no idea who I really was. I'd introduced myself as Arielle Monroe, data analyst. I'd worn a simple dress from Nordstrom Rack. I'd driven my 7-year-old Honda Civic. Everything about me screamed, comfortable but not wealthy. And Caleb, with his developer's eye for value assessment, had sized me up accordingly. I should have seen the warning signs. The way he'd paid for dinner without asking. The way he'd introduced me to his friends as very down-to-earth. The way he'd smiled when I'd mentioned my student loans, as if my financial limitations were endearing. But I'd wanted to believe that someone could love me without the complications of wealth. So when Caleb proposed 6 months later, at a restaurant he'd chosen, with a ring he'd selected, surrounded by his friends who applauded on cue, I'd said yes. And I'd said nothing about the trustees in New York, or the $15 billion waiting in legal structures Caleb would never think to look for, or the single condition that his behavior would either satisfy or destroy. I'd moved to Atlanta with 2 suitcases, exactly as my mother had taught me, traveling light, leaving no trail, giving nothing away. Caleb had been thrilled. His friends joked about him, rescuing me from nonprofit poverty. His business partners made comments about marrying down but loving up. I'd smiled through all of it, because I'd learned something important. People reveal who they are when they think you can't hurt them. And Caleb was about to reveal everything. 3 weeks before our wedding, I received an encrypted email from Morrison Webb, the lead trustee I'd met exactly twice. The subject line read, "Critical life event flagged. Ms. Monroe, we have been notified of your upcoming marriage to Mr. Caleb Monroe. As per the terms established by your grandfather's trust, this triggers a formal evaluation period. Any prenuptial agreements, financial arrangements, or documented patterns of behavior will be reviewed. Please forward all relevant documents to our legal team. Standard monitoring protocols remain in effect." I'd read it 3 times, my heart pounding. This was it. The test I'd been preparing for without knowing exactly when it would come. And then, 2 weeks later, Caleb slid the prenup across his glass dining table and proven exactly what the trustees needed to know. The wedding took place in Savannah, Georgia, at a historic venue Caleb had chosen because it photographed well for his brand. Everything was elegant, everything was controlled, and everything was his. The guest list was dominated by Caleb's business associates. My side of the aisle held a few college friends, former nonprofit colleagues, and exactly 0 family, a fact Caleb had mentioned to his groomsmen as convenient for budgeting. I wore a dress I'd bought myself. Caleb wore a custom Tom Ford tux and a watch that cost more than my annual salary. During the vows, Caleb had added a personal section. "Arielle," he'd said, holding both my hands and speaking to me like I was the audience. "You've taught me that love isn't about what you have. It's about who you are. And I promise to build a life with you that honors both of us." The crowd sighed appreciatively. I'd smiled and said my vows quietly, words I'd written about partnership, respect, and seeing each other clearly. Caleb kissed me like he'd won something. The reception was held at a riverfront estate. Caleb gave a toast about building our future together, referencing his developments and vision while mentioning me only as the woman who keeps me grounded. His business partner Marcus toasted to Caleb finally finding someone who doesn't care about his money, a joke that got huge laughs. I raised my glass and said nothing. After the wedding, things shifted in small ways that accumulated like compound interest. We lived in Caleb's Buckhead condo, not our condo, but his. He made that clear every time he referenced the mortgage, the HOA fees, the property taxes he alone covered. "I'm not saying you need to contribute," he'd say during dinners with colleagues, "but I do carry the financial weight of our lifestyle." His colleagues would nod sympathetically. I continued working at my nonprofit job, analyzing housing data, work that mattered to me, work that paid $58,000 a year. Caleb found this charming. Arielle's very committed to her causes, he'd explain at investor dinners. The word causes delivered with affectionate condescension. At a dinner party 6 weeks after the wedding, one of Caleb's investors asked what I did. "Community development research." "Oh, that's wonderful," the woman replied, in a tone that meant how sweet, but definitely not how impressive. "It's so important to have people willing to work in those sectors, even if the compensation isn't exactly competitive." Caleb laughed comfortably. "Arielle's got her own lane," he added, his hand finding mine in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like ownership. "She keeps me grounded, reminds me what real work looks like." I'd learned to smile through these moments, to nod when Caleb referenced my condo and my connections and the sacrifices I make to maintain our lifestyle. But I didn't stay silent in my own records. I kept a private journal, not dramatic, just factual. Dates, quotes, contexts. November 14th. Caleb referred to the condo as his investment I'm lucky to live in during dinner with the Hendersons. November 22nd. Introduced me to new investor as very down-to-earth, with emphasis suggesting this was unusual and valuable. December 3rd. Dismissed my suggestion to contribute to holiday decorations budget, saying, "I've got it covered. You just focus on your little job." Every instance of financial exclusion, every dismissive comment, every casual humiliation wrapped in affection, I documented it all, not because I was planning revenge, but because I'd learned that the truth only matters if you can prove it. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, the trustees were doing the same thing. Morrison Webb would later tell me they'd begun compiling evidence the moment Caleb submitted the prenup to his attorney. Every clause, every term, every piece of language that framed me as a liability. They'd interviewed the notary. They'd obtained copies of emails between Caleb and his lawyer. They'd even tracked social media posts where Caleb's friends joked about him, locking it down with an ironclad prenup. The trustees weren't emotional. They were gathering data. And the data painted a clear picture of a man who had married a woman he believed he was financially superior to, and who had no intention of treating her as an equal partner. Caleb thought his prenup protected him. The trustees knew it protected me. 3 months into our marriage, I received another encrypted email from Morrison Webb. "Ms. Monroe, our review is nearing completion. Continue standard protocols. Make no changes to current circumstances. We will notify you when determination is final." I'd read it in the bathroom, my hands shaking slightly. It was almost time, and I was about to find out if $15 billion and 4 generations of family wealth would finally become mine. All because Caleb Monroe had been absolutely certain I had nothing. Caleb's Midtown Atlanta development project was supposed to be his masterpiece. The Sterling Tower, a mixed-use high-rise combining luxury condos, boutique retail, and Class A office space, was his pitch to move from successful to significant. He'd secured the land, brought in architects, and assembled investors who saw him as Atlanta's rising star. Everything looked perfect. On paper, this is the project that changes everything, Caleb told me one evening, spreading blueprints across the dining table I wasn't allowed to use because it was his presentation space. "Once Sterling Tower breaks ground, I'm not just a developer. I'm a city shaper." I nodded, watching him trace his fingers over renderings of a building that would reshape a neighborhood without consulting the people who live there. "When does construction start?" 6 weeks. Everything's locked in. Funding, permits, timelines. This is happening. Except it wasn't. 2 weeks later, Caleb came home with his jaw tight and shoulders tense. "Funding delays," he muttered, pouring himself a scotch at 4 p.m. "One of the partner groups is reassessing their position. Code for getting cold feet." "Which group?" "Clearwater Infrastructure Holdings. Some kind of holding company out of New York. I don't even know who the actual principals are. Everything's run through proxies." He drained half his drink. "They were supposed to commit $40 million. Now they're saying they need to review additional due diligence." I kept my face neutral. Clearwater Infrastructure Holdings was one of 12 corporate entities controlled by my family's trust. And they weren't reviewing due diligence on the project. They were reviewing due diligence on Caleb. "I'm sure it'll work out." Caleb looked at me like I'd suggested something sweet, but hopelessly naive. "This is business, Arielle. It doesn't just work out. You have to make it work out." But over the next month, Caleb discovered that some things couldn't be forced. Another investor group, Pacific Logistics Partners, also controlled by my trust, suddenly restructured their investment priorities and pulled their commitment. Then a third partner requested forensic accounting on Caleb's previous projects. One by one, the pieces of Caleb's masterpiece were being quietly removed. Not dramatically, just withdrawn. "It's like the ground is moving under me," Caleb said one night, staring at another email declining participation. "Nothing makes sense. These were done deals. Committed capital. And now everyone's acting like the fundamentals changed, but they haven't." He looked at me, frustrated. "Have you ever felt like the universe is just working against you?" "Sometimes." What I didn't say was that it wasn't the universe. It was 3 trustees in Manhattan who determined that Caleb's treatment of me constituted exactly the kind of exploitation my grandfather's trust was designed to prevent. And they were pulling every string they could reach. While Caleb's project unraveled, I'd started traveling. Not with Caleb, He never invited me to business trips, explaining that investor meetings aren't social events. I traveled alone. Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles. Caleb assumed I was visiting friends or attending nonprofit conferences. In reality, I was attending meetings in glass-walled conference rooms, sitting across from attorneys, trustees, and financial advisors who manage portfolios larger than some countries' GDP. Ms. Monroe, Morrison Webb said during our Chicago meeting, the determination is nearly complete. The evidence supports activation of the full inheritance structure. However, we want to ensure there are no complications during the transition period. What kind of complications? Your husband attempting to claim marital interest in newly disclosed assets. Legal challenges based on non-disclosure. Public disputes that could affect the foundation's operations. Webb slid a document across the table. This is a proposed timeline. The inheritance activates in 30 days. During that period, we recommend you make no changes to your living situation, employment, or public behavior. Let Mr. Monroe continue as he has been. The prenup he insisted upon will protect you completely during any subsequent legal proceedings. I read through the timeline, my heart pounding. 30 days. And after activation? Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he'd been waiting for this question. After activation, Ms. Monroe, you'll have full discretion over how you choose to proceed. The trust will support whatever decision you make. But men like your husband rarely respond well to discovering they've been wrong about someone's value. He paused. Be prepared for that reaction. I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. Caleb would lose his mind when he found out. I flew back to Atlanta that evening. Caleb was working late on revised proposals for Sterling Tower, trying to salvage a project that was already dead. He barely looked up when I came in. How was your trip? Good. Productive. That's nice. He went back to his laptop, and I went to the guest office. I sat at my desk and opened my private journal. March 15th. Trustees confirm activation in 30 days. Caleb's project continues to collapse. He still has no idea why. I closed the journal and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. In 30 days, everything would change. But Caleb wouldn't know it. Not until the moment his carefully constructed world realized it had been built on a foundation he never understood. And by then, it would be far too late. The Manhattan law office of Morrison Webb occupied the 47th floor of a midtown building, with views that made even Atlanta's skyline look modest. I sat across from Webb and two other trustees, Catherine Lee from Zurich and James Alderson from London, while they explained what was about to happen to my life. The formal activation occurred at midnight Eastern Time, Webb said calmly. As of this morning, you are the sole controlling beneficiary of the Monroe Family Trust, with full discretionary authority over $15.3 billion in liquid and structured assets. He slid a portfolio across the mahogany table. This document outlines the primary holdings: infrastructure investments, logistics operations, real estate portfolios, and foundation endowments. I opened the portfolio with steady hands. Page after page of assets. Companies I'd never heard of that generated millions in revenue. Properties across 3 continents. Investment vehicles so complex they required footnotes. The prenuptial agreement you signed, Catherine Lee continued, has been reviewed by our legal team. It explicitly separates all marital assets and future earnings. More importantly, it establishes that any wealth you possessed prior to or independent of the marriage remains solely yours. She smiled, small, knowing, strategic. Mr. Monroe's attorney was quite thorough. The prenup protects you perfectly. What about his claim that I didn't disclose assets? James Alderson leaned forward. Disclosure requirements apply to assets you possess at the time of signing. The inheritance activated after your marriage. You had nothing to disclose because you didn't possess it yet. Legally, Webb added, you owe him nothing. No claims, no rights, no access. The word access hung in the air. That was what this was really about. Not the money itself, but who controlled it. Your husband's development projects, Webb continued, have been receiving indirect capital from trust-controlled entities for the past 18 months. We've now withdrawn all commitments. The Sterling Tower project will not proceed. I looked up sharply. You're deliberately sabotaging his business? We're exercising our fiduciary responsibility to protect trust assets, Webb corrected. Mr. Monroe's projects were evaluated on their merits. They were found to be financially unsound and ethically problematic. We declined to continue support. Catherine Lee added, he never knew the capital was connected to you. Most developers don't research ownership structures of their investment partners. They simply take the money. What happens now? That depends entirely on what you want, Webb said. The trust is yours to direct. You can stay married or file for divorce. You can tell your husband everything or tell him nothing. He paused. But I will offer one piece of advice. Men like your husband built their identity on a specific understanding of power. When that understanding is challenged, the reaction can be volatile. I thought about Caleb's face when he talked about his condo, his connections, his success. I thought about the prenup he'd slid across the table with absolute confidence. I want to do nothing, I said finally. No announcements. No press releases. I want to continue exactly as I have been. Webb nodded. And when the truth emerges naturally, then it emerges. But I won't be the one to tell him. Let him figure it out himself. Catherine Lee smiled with something that looked like approval. Gravity is often the most effective teacher. We spent the next 3 hours reviewing trust structures, establishing secure communication protocols, and setting up the infrastructure I'd need. By the time I stepped onto 47th Street, the sun was setting over Manhattan. I looked exactly the same. Same clothes from Nordstrom Rack. Same 7-year-old Honda Civic. Same Arielle Monroe who worked at a nonprofit and lived in her husband's condo and apparently brought nothing to the table. Except now, I own the table, and the building it sat in, and probably the company that manufactured it. I took the subway to Grand Central and caught the train to the airport. On the flight back, I drafted an email giving notice that I'd be transitioning to part-time work. Not quitting, just scaling back. Because Caleb would notice if I stopped working entirely. And I wanted him to keep believing, for just a little while longer, that nothing had changed. When I got back that evening, Caleb was on the phone, his voice tight. I understand the market shifted, but we had a commitment. Verbal commitments mean something in this industry. He listened, his jaw clenching. Fine, I'll find other partners. This project doesn't die because one group got cold feet. He hung up and looked at me, barely registering that I'd been gone all day. Another investor pulled out. Sterling Tower is officially on life support. I'm sorry. I was sorry his project was failing, but I wasn't sorry about why. It's fine, Caleb muttered, pouring himself scotch. I'll figure it out. I always do. He didn't ask about my day. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't ask anything. I went to the guest office and closed the door. 30 days ago, I'd been a woman with a modest nonprofit job and a husband who thought he was doing her a favor. Now, I was the sole beneficiary of a $15 billion fortune. And Caleb Monroe had absolutely no idea. But he would. Soon. The philanthropy gala at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was exactly the kind of event Caleb loved. High-profile donors, strategic networking, and a guest list that read like a Forbes power ranking. He'd flown out to court new investors. Now that Sterling Tower had collapsed and his funding sources had mysteriously dried up, I'd come separately. Not because Caleb had invited me. He'd mentioned the event casually, assuming I wouldn't be interested or couldn't afford the flight. I'd come because Morrison Webb had called 2 days earlier. The Pacific Development Foundation is hosting their annual gala in San Francisco. You're a trustee. You should attend. I'm a trustee. As of the inheritance activation, yes. Your grandfather established the foundation 60 years ago. You're now the primary decision maker for all grant distributions. He paused. Your husband will likely be there. He's been trying to secure foundation support. He has no idea you're connected to it. I booked my flight that afternoon. The gala was held in the museum's modern wing, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay. 300 donors circulated through galleries, champagne in hand, discussing impact investments. I wore a simple black dress I'd owned for years, pearl earrings, minimal makeup. Nothing that would draw attention. Caleb was across the room when I arrived, deep in conversation with potential investors. He was animated, confident, working the room with charm and absolute certainty in his own value. He didn't see me enter. I moved through the crowd quietly, finding a position near one of the galleries. Ms. Monroe. I turned to find a woman in her 50s, elegant in navy. I'm Rebecca Chun, executive director of the foundation. We've been hoping to meet you in person. Your grandfather's vision has helped thousands of families over the decades. She gestured toward a group near the windows. Several board members are here tonight. Would you like to join us? We'd love to discuss the upcoming grant cycle and get your input on strategic priorities. I glanced toward Caleb. He was still networking, completely absorbed. I'd be happy to. Rebecca led me toward the windows, where 4 others stood: board members, major donors, foundation staff. Everyone, Rebecca said, her voice carrying. I'd like you to meet Arielle Monroe, trustee and majority stakeholder of the Pacific Development Foundation. The group turned with interest and respect, several extending hands. It's wonderful to finally meet you in person, an older man said. Your grandfather would be proud. We're particularly excited about the new housing equity initiative you've proposed, a woman added. The Oakland project especially. It's exactly the kind of ethical development we need. I was listening when I felt it. That prickling awareness of being watched. I turned slightly and saw Caleb, frozen mid-conversation across the room, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen. Confusion, recognition, dawning dread. He excused himself and crossed the gallery floor, his movements controlled but his face showing cracks. Arielle. His voice was careful. I didn't know you were in San Francisco. Last-minute trip. Foundation business. Rebecca smiled at Caleb. Are you two acquainted? We're married, Caleb said, his eyes never leaving my face. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. Oh, I didn't realize. What a lovely coincidence. She turned to the group. Mr. Monroe has submitted a proposal for foundation funding on his Atlanta development project. She looked at me. I believe we're still reviewing it. We are, I confirmed. It's under consideration. Caleb's face had gone pale. Arielle, he said slowly, can we talk privately? Of course. I excused myself and followed Caleb to a quieter corner, away from the crowd. He turned to face me, his expression cycling through emotions. Shock, anger, confusion, betrayal. What the hell is going on? Trustee? Majority stakeholder? The Oakland housing project? Arielle, what aren't you telling me? I met his eyes steadily. You should read contracts more carefully, Caleb. What does that mean? It means you made a lot of assumptions. About who I am. About what I'm worth. About what I bring to our marriage. Caleb stared. Are you saying you have money? I'm saying you never asked. You decided who I was the moment I moved in with 2 suitcases. You decided I needed you. You decided I was lucky to be with you. My voice remained calm. You were so certain of my position that you never questioned it. How much money are we talking about? Enough. Enough for what? Enough that the prenup you made me sign protects me completely. Enough that several of your investors were actually trust-controlled entities I have influence over. Enough that your Sterling Tower project failed because I withdrew support. Caleb stepped back as if struck. You sabotaged me? I withdrew my capital from a project I determined was financially unsound and ethically problematic. That's not sabotage. That's fiduciary responsibility. Your capital? Arielle, what the fuck is happening? People were starting to notice. I kept my voice low. What's happening is that you built your life on assumptions that were wrong. And now you're dealing with reality. Caleb's hands were shaking. How long have you known? About this money, this foundation, whatever this is. Always. The word landed like a bomb. Always, Caleb repeated hoarsely. You've had money this whole time? While I was paying for everything. While you were pretending to struggle with your nonprofit salary. I wasn't pretending anything. You assumed. There's a difference. This is insane. Caleb ran his hands through his hair. You let me think. Everyone thinks. You're just some community organizer with student loans. Meanwhile, you're what? Some kind of secret heiress. I'm someone who learned a long time ago that people reveal who they really are when they think you can't hurt them. I paused. And you revealed exactly who you are, Caleb. The prenup proved it. Your behavior proved it. Every time you referred to my condo and my connections and my sacrifices, you proved it. Caleb looked like he was going to be sick. I need to talk to my lawyer. That's a good idea. You're going to need one. I turned and walked back toward the foundation board members, leaving Caleb standing alone, his carefully constructed world collapsing. Rebecca Chin smiled as I rejoined the group. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. Just a misunderstanding. But across the gallery, Caleb was already on his phone, his face pale and hands shaking as he made the call that would confirm his worst fear. He'd married a woman worth billions. And the prenup he'd forced her to sign meant he'd never see a penny. 2 weeks had passed since the San Francisco gala. Caleb sat across from Richard Park, the lawyer who drafted his ironclad prenuptial agreement. waiting for answers he knew he wouldn't like. I've reviewed everything, Park said grimly. The trust documents, the corporate structures, the timeline. Caleb, this is bad. How bad? Park opened a folder. Your wife is the sole beneficiary of the Monroe Family Trust, established by her grandfather in 1952, growing through strategic investments for 70 years. He slid a document across the desk. Current estimated value, $15.3 billion. Caleb felt the room tilt. Billion? With a B? Yes. And she's had access this whole time? No. That's critical. Park leaned forward. The trust had activation conditions. Arielle only gained full control after she married without, and I quote, demonstrated financial coercion or exploitation by her spouse. Caleb's stomach dropped. The prenup. The prenup, Park confirmed. The document we drafted became legal evidence that you viewed the marriage as a financial risk needing protection. Combined with documented patterns of behavior, financial exclusion, dismissive language, public belittlement, it satisfied the trust's activation condition. Park's voice was clinical, devastating. In essence, your prenup proved to her trustees that she was marrying someone who had no idea about her wealth and who treated her as financially inferior. That was exactly what they needed to release the inheritance. Caleb leaned back. So she used me. I don't think it was quite that calculated, Park said carefully. She couldn't access the money until she was married. The trustees were watching to see if her spouse would demonstrate exploitative behavior. You demonstrated it. By protecting my assets. By treating her like she had nothing to offer and you were doing her a favor, Park said bluntly. The prenup wasn't just financial protection. It was a character test. And you failed. Silence filled the office. What are my options? Legally? Almost none. Park pulled out another document. The prenup you insisted on separates all assets acquired before, during, and after the marriage. It explicitly states that neither party has claim to the other's wealth, property, or income. You drafted this to protect yourself. He paused. It protects her perfectly. What about non-disclosure? She didn't tell me about the inheritance. The inheritance didn't exist in her possession when you married. It activated after the wedding. There was nothing to disclose. What about fraud? Deception? She never lied about anything. You never asked about her family wealth. You assumed based on her lifestyle choices. Assumptions aren't grounds for fraud. Park's expression softened. Caleb, from a legal standpoint, your wife did everything correctly. She married you without access to her inheritance. She signed your prenup without argument. She never misrepresented herself. You just never bothered to look deeper than the surface. Caleb stood abruptly, pacing. What about my projects? Sterling Tower collapsed because her foundation pulled funding. That's interference. That's investment discretion. Foundation entities aren't required to fund any particular project. They evaluated yours and declined. You have no legal recourse. This is insane. This is what happens when you make assumptions about power, Park said quietly. You thought you had it. You were wrong. Caleb returned to the condo that evening to find Arielle in the guest office, working on her laptop. She looked up, her expression calm. We need to talk, Caleb said. Okay. He sat down, trying to organize fragmenting thoughts. My lawyer says I have no legal claim to your money. That's correct. Because of the prenup I made you sign. Yes. Caleb laughed, bitter, hollow. So you used my own contract against me. I signed what you asked me to sign, Arielle said evenly. You were very clear that you wanted complete separation of assets. I honored that. You let me think you were broke. No, Arielle corrected. You decided I was broke based on how I lived. I never lied. I never claimed poverty. I never asked you for money. I simply existed as myself, and you created a narrative around that. You should have told me. Why? Arielle's voice gained an edge. So you could treat me differently? So you could see me as valuable? So you could decide I was worth respect once you knew about the money? She leaned forward. You never asked, Caleb. In 2 years of dating and 8 months of marriage, you never once asked about my family, my background, my history. You saw my nonprofit job and my secondhand clothes, and you decided that was all I was worth. You built an entire relationship on assumptions you never questioned. Because you let me. I let you reveal who you really are, Arielle said. And you did. Every time you introduced me as low maintenance. Every time you referred to my condo like I was a guest in my own home. Every time you made jokes about poverty by association. She stood. You showed me exactly what kind of partner you are when you think you have all the power. You showed me you don't value equity, respect, or partnership. You value control. This is bullshit, Caleb said, his voice rising. You deliberately deceived me. I lived authentically. You made assumptions. There's a difference. Caleb stood too. So what now? You just take your billions and leave? Destroy everything I've built? I haven't destroyed anything, Arielle said quietly. Your projects failed because they weren't financially sound. Your reputation is damaged because people see how you treated your wife. Your world is collapsing because it was built on foundations that were never solid. She picked up a folder and handed it to him. These are divorce papers. I'm filing in California. The prenup you drafted makes this very simple. Complete separation of assets, minimal spousal support, no contested claims. Caleb stared at the folder. You planned this from the beginning. No, Arielle said. I hoped you'd be different. I hoped you'd see me as a partner regardless of money. I hoped the man I married would value me for who I am, not what I have. She paused. But you didn't. You showed me over and over that you saw me as less than, as something you were generous to tolerate. And now you're punishing me for it. No, Arielle said simply. I'm freeing both of us from a marriage that was never built on honest partnership. She walked past him toward the door. I'll be staying somewhere else tonight. You can have your lawyer contact mine. Arielle. She stopped but didn't turn. For what it's worth, Caleb said, his voice cracking, I did care about you. Arielle was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said finally, but you cared about the version of me that fit your narrative. You never cared enough to question if that narrative was true. She walked out, leaving Caleb alone in the condo that had always been his, surrounded by evidence of success that suddenly felt hollow. Outside, Arielle sat in her Honda Civic and allowed herself to feel the weight of what had just happened. She'd walked away from her marriage. She'd walked away from a man who'd thought he was protecting himself while revealing exactly who he was. And she'd walked away with her inheritance, her dignity, and her future entirely in her own hands. She started the car and drove toward the hotel where she'd booked a suite, not because she needed luxury, but because she deserved space that was entirely hers. Tomorrow, she'd start building something new. Tonight, she'd simply breathe. 6 months later, the Oakland Community Center stood where a vacant lot had been deteriorating for 20 years, a building designed by local architects, built by union labor, funded through the Monroe Foundation's Housing Equity Initiative. I stood at the opening ceremony, surrounded by families from the neighborhood, nonprofit leaders I'd worked with, and city officials who'd finally seen what development could look like when designed for communities, not imposed on them. No one except the trustees knew I'd personally funded the entire $30 million project. The dedication plaque read simply, Monroe Family Community Center, built for Oakland, by Oakland. My grandfather's name appeared nowhere. Neither did mine. That was deliberate. This is incredible, said Maria Santos, director of the nonprofit I'd worked for before everything changed. How did the foundation even know about our neighborhood? Someone must have told them, I said with a small smile. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, exactly as I'd outlined. Caleb had received nothing beyond what his own prenup specified, which was nothing. His legal team tried multiple approaches, claiming fraud, demanding discovery of when I'd known about the inheritance, arguing that non-disclosure constituted deception. Every argument failed. The prenup he drafted was airtight. His career in Atlanta had effectively ended. Sterling Tower remained a vacant lot. His business partnerships dissolved. His name, once associated with rising success, now carried whispers of the man who'd married a billionaire and treated her like a charity case. I hadn't spoken publicly about any of it. I'd simply stepped back and let the truth speak for itself. The foundation had announced several major initiatives. Housing equity projects in Oakland, Chicago, and Seattle. Community development funds for neighborhood-led planning. Ethical development standards requiring genuine community partnership. My name appeared on foundation materials only as a Monroe trustee. Most people assumed it was someone else. I preferred it that way. 3 weeks after the community center opening, I received a letter forwarded from my attorney. It was from Caleb. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. Arielle, I don't expect you to respond. I don't even know if you'll read this. But I need to say something. I was wrong. Not just about the money. Though obviously I was spectacularly wrong about that. I was wrong about you. About what partnership means. About what respect looks like. I spent 2 years deciding who you were based on what I could see. I never bothered to look deeper. I never asked the right questions. I never treated you like someone whose internal life might be as complex and valuable as my own. The prenup wasn't about protecting my assets. It was about protecting my ego. About making sure you knew I was the successful one, the important one, the one who mattered. I know now that I was standing next to someone extraordinary, and I chose to see her as ordinary because it made me feel bigger. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost. It wasn't access to money. It was access to you. Caleb, I read the letter twice, then set it down. It was a good apology. Honest. Self-aware. Genuinely remorseful. But it was also 6 months too late. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because some doors, once closed, should stay that way. That evening, I had dinner with Morrison Webb at a quiet restaurant in San Francisco. The foundation is performing exceptionally well, he said, reviewing quarterly reports. The community-led development model you've implemented is getting attention from other philanthropies. By listening, I said simply. By treating communities like they're experts on their own needs instead of problems to be solved. Webb smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. He built the fortune through infrastructure and logistics. You're building legacy through equity and access. They're not that different. Both are about connecting people to resources they need. His generation did it through highways and shipping lanes. Mine does it through housing and opportunity. Webb raised his glass. To new infrastructure. I touched my glass to his. To access that actually means something. 2 years later, I sat in a board meeting at the Monroe Foundation's Oakland headquarters, a renovated warehouse, keeping the industrial character while making it fully accessible and community-focused. The board was reviewing grant proposals for the next fiscal year. $300 million in funding requests ranging from affordable housing to job training to childcare access. The Atlanta proposal, one board member said, pulling up the file. Mixed-use development in an underserved neighborhood. The developer has strong credentials. I looked at the application. The lead developer was Marcus Chun, Caleb's former business partner. The project was exactly where Sterling Tower would have been built, but the design was completely different. Community input sessions, affordable housing mandates, local hiring requirements, profit sharing with neighborhood associations. Everything Caleb's project hadn't been. This is solid work, I said. Approve it. After the meeting, I walked through Oakland's Rockridge neighborhood where I'd grown up, past the townhouse where my mother had raised me to understand that power was most effective when invisible. She'd been right. The Monroe fortune had survived 4 generations not because it announced itself, but because it worked quietly, systematically, building infrastructure that outlasted any individual ego. I'd inherited that fortune, but more importantly, I'd inherited that philosophy. And I was using it to build something my grandfather never imagined. A legacy based not on what you owned, but on what you made accessible to others. My phone buzzed. A text from Maria Santos. Just heard the Atlanta project got funded. You had anything to do with that? I smiled and typed back. The foundation supports good work. That's all. She responded with celebration emojis. I pocketed my phone and continued walking. Just another person on an Oakland sidewalk. Indistinguishable from anyone else. No designer clothes. No luxury car. No visible markers of wealth. Exactly as I'd always been. Exactly as I'd always wanted to be. Because I'd learned something important from Caleb Monroe. The people who need you to know they're powerful are the ones who aren't sure of their own strength. Real power doesn't announce itself. It just builds. Quietly. Systematically. Permanently. And when done right, it creates infrastructure that lifts everyone. Not just the person who built it. Caleb had wanted access to wealth. I'd given him access to himself, a reflection so clear he couldn't avoid seeing who he really was. And in the end, that was the inheritance that mattered most. Not the $15 billion, but the clarity about what really counts. He'd lost money he never had. I'd gained freedom I'd always deserved. And that, ultimately, was the only math that mattered. He didn't lose money. He lost access. Caleb Monroe married a woman he thought was poor and treated her accordingly, with condescension wrapped in affection, with control disguised as protection, with agreements designed to keep her in her place. What he didn't know was that Arielle wasn't poor. She was patient. She wasn't powerless. She was watching. And the contract he used to control her became the proof that set her free. $15 billion changed hands not because of revenge, but because of revelation. The prenup he celebrated became his evidence. The wife he underestimated became untouchable. And the fortune he never knew existed went to build a world where people like Arielle don't have to hide who they are just to find out who's worth trusting. He thought the prenup protected him. It protected her. And that's the only signature that mattered. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.